that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
Truth teller, that's for sure. Here's the deal. It looks like both sides initially violated the ceasefire that was agreed upon last night. That's annoying. Our president is clearly annoyed, as he should be. But for the Democrats and the Trump haters to still be insisting this is World War III, I think that's a bit of a stretch, don't you? Yesterday, Iran symbolically attacked our military base in Qatar, gave advance notice it was going to do it to minimize any potential casualties, and the U.S. sustained no casualties. That doesn't feel very World War III-ish, does it? Look, I'm not saying this thing is definitely over and we can never really put faith in Iran, but if a symbolic attack that resulted in 0 U.S. casualties or significant damage is the extent of that retaliation, a move just to save face with their controlled people who don't have access to media to know the retaliation was a flop, I'd say we are still in a better spot than we were, I don't know, a week ago. But you know what's the most disappointing part, though? Democrats, well, they hate Trump so much, even when it's good for America and good for the free world, they'll either privately or even publicly continue to root against America because their TDS has caused such significant brain and soul rot. Were they ever really concerned about our troops or a World War III? You know what? I doubt it. It's worth noting that much like the leftists who have only ever expressed support for law enforcement on January 6th, those same folks only ever seem to express concern for our troops when they can weaponize it, even pathetically, against President Trump. I don't know if this ends here or what's next, but I do know I won't be taking foreign policy advice or doomsday projections from the likes of people who support terrorist sympathizers like this dude roaming around our great American cities.
Palestine will live forever! Palestine will live forever! From the river to the sea! From the river to the sea! Palestine will be free! Palestine will be free! From the sea to the river! From the sea to the river! Palestine will live forever! Palestine will live forever!
Deport now. What we ought to be doing, and what I'm sure our administration will continue to pursue, is the dismantling of anti-American, anti-Jewish, terrorist-sympathizing, jihadist-supporting networks, groups, and coalitions right here at home. You know, Iran should never be allowed to have a nuke, but our country should never be, and should have never been allowed to be, the dumping ground for people who want to kill us, destroy our culture, and dismantle our American way of life. Joining me now with his expert take on it all and so much more is Harvard Law Professor Emeritus and Civil Liberties lawyer, the one and only, the icon, Alan Dershowitz. Thank you so much for being with me. I have so much to talk to you about, and I know that foreign policy might not necessarily be your specific area of expertise, but I got to get your initial thought on where we are this morning. Do we have a ceasefire? Do we not have a ceasefire? Should we have taken action against Iran? Should Israel continue? I got to get your hot word on it.
Well, first, the attack on the 3 nuclear facilities was absolutely justified as a matter of international law, American law, constitutional law. Trump did exactly the right thing. He kept his promise that he would never allow Iran to become a nuclear arsenal power. And he did it very effectively without any casualties. And so without that, there wouldn't have been a ceasefire. Now, the one area I think I have some problem with him on is that Iran broke the ceasefire, fired a rocket, and killed 4 Israelis. Now, if Iran had killed 4 Americans, God forbid, in Qatar, believe me, the United States would have responded. And so I think that President Trump, for understandable reasons, he wants to keep the ceasefire, lost his temper a little bit at Israel because he thought maybe Israel's response would break the ceasefire. But Israel had a perfect right under the ceasefire to respond to the killing of 4 innocent civilians in Beersheba, which was done by Iran in violation of the ceasefire. All right, that's all water under the bridge now. I think we have an enduring ceasefire now. President Trump says it will endure forever. Let's wait and see. Iran still hasn't done anything about freeing the hostages in Gaza. They haven't done anything about eliminating their call for Israel's destruction. So we still have very much a work in progress. In my book, The Preventive State, I make a very, very strong argument for why countries like Israel and the United States are entitled, as a matter of law and morality, to attack imminent damage and danger to our country. And I think that President Trump followed through exactly what the law, what morality, what diplomacy require. And I think the world has come to recognize that. And I suspect that Donald Trump will get the Nobel Peace Prize if the Nobel Committee acts fairly and not politically. But, you know, they may give it to some radical leftist who hasn't done anything to promote peace. They've done that in the past. Look, they gave it to Yasser Arafat some years ago. So I hope they come to their senses and give it to Donald Trump, who's done an enormous amount of good to bring about peace in the Middle East.
I agree with you on that. Now, we know Democrats in Congress and a couple Republicans are really upset that they weren't given advance notice, or they're saying, you know, AOC, of course, calling for impeachment, saying that the president acted outside of his authority. These people are ridiculous. On its face, we can all see that these people are ridiculous. They call for impeachment over everything. But I'm wondering, from the legal perspective here, do they have any ground to stand on in pursuing this at all in terms of impeachment, or saying he acted outside of his authority in calling for the strikes without their approval?
No, 0, 0, 0. First of all, he didn't act outside his authority. He acted within his authority. The framers of the Constitution initially gave Congress the power to wage war, and then James Madison changed that and said to declare war, because he understood that the president has to have the authority to react to immediate events. But let's assume hypothetically that the president acted beyond his authority. That's not a ground for impeachment. The ground for impeachment, as I argued successfully to the United States Senate on behalf of Donald Trump several years ago, you have to have committed treason. This isn't treason. Bribery, it isn't bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. This doesn't fit into that category. So AOC simply doesn't know what she's talking about. She ought to go back to tending bar. And I don't know whether she was a good bartender or not, but she's a terrible, terrible member of Congress and a terrible, terrible interpreter of the Constitution. I have nothing but absolute contempt for her. You know, she makes it because she appeals to the most radical elements of society and appeals to young extremists. But she's no good for America, and she's no good for the world, and she's no good for peace. And my prediction is she will never accomplish anything. And if she becomes the spokesperson for the Democratic Party will never win another election.
Are you concerned at all on that point about New York City's mayoral primary today, and the fact that they could be on the cusp of actually elevating a proud Democrat socialist who has been, I believe, credibly accused of anti-Semitism? He didn't come out and condemn the attacks on October 7th, and he's made some really interesting statements when it comes to Israel. He's tried to walk some of them back, but I don't think he's ever done a full walk back, to my knowledge. And, you know, I know Andrew Cuomo is not a great option, but I think the path New York City could be headed down today, does that disturb or frighten you?
It does, very much so. He has never walked back his claim that Israel does not have the right to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people. But remember, this is a countrywide problem. We've seen Chicago elect a radical progressive, and it's really turned Chicago into a very, very bad place. we saw San Francisco elect as the district attorney an avowed communist, basically, radical, the grandson of a close friend of mine who I actually represented, but somebody who was impeached eventually and thrown out of office. But now, of course, he's teaching at the University of California at Berkeley, which is where he belongs. There, he's at the center. By American standards, he's at the extreme, extreme, extreme left. By San Francisco standards, he's kind of in the middle. And so what we're seeing is cities, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, being turned over to the hard left. That's bad for the cities. It's bad for America. It's bad for world peace. And it tells us what our future may look like, because these are all kind of youngish people who may represent the future. Today, they're, candidates, but in 10 years from now, they may become mainstream, and that will really hurt America's future. So I'm very concerned about the future of America and the radicalization. And what we're seeing happening is what happened in Weimar Germany in the 1920s, when we saw a division among the people with the extreme, extreme left winning. And then, of course, there was a reaction, and the extreme, extreme right took over in the 1930s. I hope we will never see that in this country.
I also have a real problem with the fact that we've been importing people who hate America, allowing them to study at our once elite universities. I want to talk about this Mahmoud Khalil situation. I played a clip of him in the open there. We know that he was supposed to go back to see his wife and his baby. Nope, he's back in the streets calling for global intifada from the river to the sea. I guess we could have projected this, but obviously the State Department, Secretary Rubio, has been very clear on this. Not only do they not want Harvard to be able to import people like this, they want Khalil out of here. But for now, at least, he's here. What is your moral and your legal take on his situation?
Well, the first thing is, my moral take is that people who make a hero out of him are just supporting the worst aspects of anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism, etc. It's one thing to defend his rights. Okay, I understand that. I defended the rights of Nazis. I defended the rights of communists. That's my job as a lawyer. But I would never make heroes of them. And they're making heroes out of this thug. I think he will eventually be deported, because I suspect strongly, and I think it will be able to be proved, that he lied on his applications for a student visa and for a green card. And that's the one area where you can take away a person's green card, take away his visa, is if he lied in his application. And, he created the fiction that he was coming to America to study. This guy hasn't been in a library except to disrupt it. Guy's a thug and an anti-Semite and an anti-American, and he has no business studying at Columbia University, which he isn't really studying at. He's just making trouble. And so I hope that, in fact, the Justice Department and the State Department find a basis in his application for having him found to have fraudulently gotten his green card. And I hope he's sent back to where he came from and let him become an agitator there. He has no right to be in America.
Does it even matter, though, if he did lie or didn't lie? I mean, Secretary Rubio's position on this has been, if he's a threat to the foreign policy interests of the United States, that he can still have his visa revoked and he can still be sent back. Do you believe in the strength of that argument?
As it applies to a student visa, yes. As it applies to a green card, it's a much weaker argument. So green card holders basically have rights very comparable to American citizens. So I think it's very important to be able to prove, if it can be done, that he lied on his green card application or on his prior application, even his visa application. Because I do think that once he has a legitimate green card, which I don't believe he has, he then does have the right to oppose American policy. So it really all depends on what he said in his application. And I'm fairly confident that Secretary of State Rubio and his team will be able to demonstrate that he got into this country and got his status in this country fraudulently.
Let's talk about Harvard. We had another judge step in and say, oh, nope, you got to allow the foreign students to come to Harvard. This is going to keep playing out. So at least for now, they can enroll foreign students. But what's your take on it? Obviously, it's kind of a matter close to your heart, given it's Harvard. Oh, yeah. But do you think that Harvard is doing enough, first of all, to combat the anti-Semitism? And do you think the Trump administration is within their authority and jurisdiction to really crack down on them in any way that they can?
Well, I have a book coming out on that. It's called Trump to Harvard, Go Fund Yourself. Now, we know what that word is because President Trump used it today without ellipses in relation to Israel and Iran. But the title of my book is Go Fund Yourself, not the actual F-bomb. And in it, I argue that the United States government has the authority to determine which people come in under student visas. Harvard is not doing enough, and Harvard acknowledges it's not doing enough. I know the president of Harvard. He's a decent man. He's trying very hard to balance his radical faculty, radical students who don't want him in any way to give in to the Trump administration. My prediction is that in the end, Harvard will make a deal, much like some law firms made a deal. And the Trump administration will claim victory. Harvard will claim victory. It will happen over the summer when the students aren't there, so you won't get protests. But as the students come back, I think if a deal is made by Harvard with the Trump administration, I think there will be demonstrations. I think there will be attacks on the good person, the president of Harvard and others. Look, you cannot be rational at a place like Harvard and survive. We saw what happened to President Larry Summers. He was fired essentially because he spoke rationally and scientifically, and he supported Israel. And as a result of that, he became anathema to much of the faculty. He was a great, great president of Harvard. And then they appoint Claudine Gay, who isn't even qualified to be a junior faculty member at Harvard. She has no qualifications. She's a complete DEI hire. And then she was found to have committed plagiarism. So she probably doesn't even belong at Harvard in any way. But the Harvard Corporation appointed her to be the president of Harvard, which says something about the Harvard Corporation, and it shows how far left and how far woke the Harvard Corporation and many of the faculty at Harvard have been. I've been at Harvard for 61 years. It has changed dramatically for the worst. It used to be a meritocracy. Now it's a mediocrity. And many, many of its classes and faculty are not qualified to be at an elite university. They're there largely because of their race and because of a desire to fill essentially quotas. The number of Jewish students, for example, has gone down from 23% to 8%, according to some statistics. And why? Because Jews are alleged to be the people who oppress others under intersectionality, which is this phony concept that divides the world into white cisgender people who oppress and the rest and other people who are oppressed, so that the Emir of Qatar is oppressed because he's an Arab, and some 90-year-old Jewish woman who's living on welfare is an oppressor because she happens to be white and Jewish. That's what they're teaching them at the divinity school at Harvard, at the public health school at Harvard. This is not me talking. This is Harvard's own report on itself, pointing to the divinity school, who in the name of Christianity has become the center point of anti-Semitism, as well as the School of Public Health, who claims to be concerned with the health of people around the world. And all they teach is intersectionality and DEI and all these phony colonial, Western, etc., attacks on America.
How did they get to that point? Was Harvard just completely taken over by foreign interests, by activist organizations? Because you'd think, as one of the premier, if not the premier American university, you'd think that they would have some concern about going in this direction. And when people see a graduate of Harvard, they have to take a second look.
They do. They have to take a third look, because the leadership of Harvard generally has been testicularly challenged. You'll pardon my expression. They simply have no balls. They do not stand up to the extremes who are destroying the university. I would say that Harvard has diminished in its intellectual prowess dramatically in the 62 years that I've been, 61, 62 years I've been associated with Harvard. And it's been the fault of the Harvard Corporation, particularly its chairman, Penny Pritzker, who's of the Pritzker family. That's the governor of Illinois, very, very left. And Penny Pritzker is the one who picked Claudine Gay. Now, she ought to be fired. She ought not to be in control of Harvard. And many of the deans and many of the faculty members who were in positions of authority and the bureaucrats at Harvard are destroying the university. And that has to stop. And it has to be returned to a place where meritocracy prevails. Meritocracy is a dirty word at Harvard. Judging people on the merits, my God, Martin Luther King, he would be ignored at Harvard. Martin Luther King, I was at that speech. I have the little button from the speech in which he said, I heard it with my own ears. I dream of a day when my children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That is anathema at Harvard. People are judged by the color of their skin, not by their accomplishments, not by their merits, not by their achievements. That's not true in all parts of Harvard. Obviously, there's great scientific research going on, and those funding should not be cut off. And students who are coming to really study and help with health and science should be encouraged to come to Harvard, but the colleagues should not. They should not be given student visas. People should not be given student visas to come and kidnap janitors at Columbia and hold them hostage and destroy their health and destroy their mental health, and there be no recriminations as the result of it. Look what happened at Harvard. A Jewish student, an Israeli student, was surrounded by Arabs who threatened him and harassed him. One of the people who surrounded him became the speaker at the Divinity School. Yep. Another one got a scholarship from the Harvard Law School Law Review. These people, instead of being punished for engaging in anti-Semitic harassment, were rewarded for it. And that's the problem. It's not only that Harvard tolerates anti-Semitism, the Divinity School and the Public Health School teaches it, promotes it, inculcates it in its students, and that must stop. And the federal government has a role to play under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act in making sure that Harvard doesn't become a cesspool of bigotry.
Would you encourage Jewish students and other students to maybe go to an SEC school, for example? I mean, I understand that these Ivy League, there's still a lot of great things that go on there, but it seems like they're really getting sidetracked with their hatred of America and their hatred of Israel. You think that maybe we should stop holding these Ivy League schools on a pedestal? Maybe really bright, brilliant students should go elsewhere and maybe not in the Northeast, maybe come here down south where we, for the most part, respect Jewish Americans and we respect Israel?
Yeah, look, I spoke at New College in Florida, in Sarasota, and I got an honorary degree from them, and I made a speech about meritocracy. Look, I didn't go to Harvard. I went to Brooklyn College. I was a poor kid. I couldn't afford to pay for college. I went to Brooklyn College, which was a great, great school. But today, Brooklyn College will not allow me to speak about Israel. They have banned me completely because of my views on Israel. So it's spread all over. And my answer is don't turn down Harvard if you get admitted. Go to Harvard, fight and change it, and be part of the campaign for meritocracy and for equality. Not equity. Equity is the opposite of equality. Let's understand. Equity says you judge people by the color of their skin. If they belong to a race which was oppressed, even if their father is a hedge fund manager and their mother is a federal judge and they have $1 billion in the bank, they're oppressed. That's under equity. And even if they're scholarship students with no money, if they're white, they're not oppressed. They're the oppressors. That cannot be the way universities succeed. So today, I think you go to Harvard if you can get in. Fight back. The problem is you won't get into Harvard if you're Jewish, because Harvard now they don't have a quota the way they used to. It used to be a 10% quota. But now it's 8%, not 10%. It's worse than it was under the quotas because they have to make room for all the radicals, extremists, and foreign students. And who are they going to put aside if they have to make room for these other students under DEI? they're going to say, well, Jews are powerful and strong. They'll be able to make it on their own. They're oppressors. So we're going to take it out on the Jewish population. I'll never forget a meeting I went to at Harvard. I wish I was the one who made this statement, but the dean explained why there were so few Jewish students. And he said, well, we're trying to take students from the inner cities. And so it's the donuts. It's the donuts around the cities, Westchester in New York, Shaker Heights, and Cleveland, Chicago. And one of the professors, I wish it was me, said, Dean, those aren't donuts. They're bagels. You're keeping out Jewish students deliberately. And that was the point. And for some of the years when I was at Harvard changed that. But I left 11 years ago. And since I left and Ruth Weiss left and a few others left, Harvard has fallen back to its 1910, 1920 quota system without quotas. But it's very difficult to be a Zionist, a Jewish student, a pro-American. It's very hard to be a Republican, to be a supporter of Trump at a place like Harvard. I think, 90-something, very, very high 90s members of the faculty are on the left. And if you want to have intellectual diversity, it has to be based on meritocracy. And I think if we apply to meritocracy, those numbers would come down considerably, because there are equally number of smart Republicans and smart Democrats. It can't be that Democrats have a monopoly on intelligence. That's just not the case.
They don't, and they don't have a monopoly on fun, sports, or I would argue looks. That's why I say, Alan, go to an SEC school, go to the University of Tennessee, go to Alabama. You'll have a better time. You'll be around better looking and more, just generally joyous people. I want to ask you now, though, about immigration, because we had, of course, our White House senior advisor, Stephen Miller. He's very fired up about this. Once again, this rogue judge. We had the Supreme Court rule that the Trump administration could, in fact, deport illegal aliens to a third country. But we've got a judge who does not want to follow through on it. And so we had Stephen Miller with his response to that Boston judge. Let's take a listen together.
Yes, this is an incredible victory, the Supreme Court win. It allows President Trump, as the law has long said, but the courts have blocked, it allows President Trump to send illegal aliens convicted of rape, murder, homicide, assault, battery, crimes against children to any country around the world that is willing to accept them. So whether that be South Sudan, or whether it be Somalia, or whether it be Ethiopia, any country in the world that is willing to accept these monsters, we can get them out of our country and be free of them forever. The only thing I have to share tonight, Sean, in a little bit of breaking news, is that the district court judge in Boston has said he's going to defy the Supreme Court's ruling. So expect fireworks tomorrow when we hold this judge accountable for refusing to obey the Supreme Court.
All right, Professor, what is your take, first of all, on the Supreme Court ruling, and then on this rogue judge who says he's not going to follow the Supreme Court? I thought that the left was really upset about that. I thought that was a constitutional crisis. I guess not in this case for them.
Well, I know the judge fairly well, and of course, I know the justices of the Supreme Court. And in this case, the justices got it right, and he didn't get it right. I think in the end, he won't defy the Supreme Court. But, he's a senior judge with a long, long, long history on the court, and he's well known for doing what he thinks is the right thing to do. But in this case, the Supreme Court got it right, and he got it wrong. The United States has the right to determine who stays in this country. This is a dispute whether the legislature should be making the decision or the executive. But the one branch that should not be making decisions about immigration and deportation is the judicial branch. They should make decisions about due process, about procedural safeguards, but not about the substance. The substance is up to the legislative and the executive branches of government, not the judicial branch.
Yeah, it's wild to me that Democrats and some of these judges just want all of these criminals just to stay right here. It's really disturbing. Now, I want to talk to you about some news that was made a few weeks back. We've got, of course, a list of pardons by President Trump. And the one that probably got the most attention because their reality fame is the Chrisley family, Todd and Julie getting this pardon. And there were some people that were very unhappy about that. They think it's simply because they were loyal or they said nice things about President Trump. That Savannah Chrisley, the daughter, said nice things about Trump. She spoke at the RNC, and they're saying, hey, listen, they got a fair trial. This is just Trump paying back his supporters by way of pardon. But I know that you took a deeper look into this and, other examples of prosecutorial misconduct. So what can you tell us about that Chrisley pardon that maybe those of us that are just laymen don't understand?
Well, first of all, I think the president is doing exactly the right thing on pardons. He's appointed two groups of people to look at the pardon process, one within the White House counsel's office, and the other, the pardon czar, Alice Johnson, in the White House itself. And so we have a very good process going forward. And I know, because I've worked with some of these folks over the years, that they're determined to serve as a check and balance on both prosecutorial and judicial excesses. And it's very important. I'll give you an example. I know they're looking carefully at what's called the trial penalty. The trial penalty is a process that's been in effect for many years. The government offers you a deal. If you plead guilty, you'll get 1 year. But if you plead not guilty and you go to trial and you're convicted, you'll get 10 years. In other words, you'll get 1 year for the crime you committed and 9 years for your arrogance in challenging the government. And the Trump administration, both the prior administration and now, has said, no, we're not going to do that. I got pardons and commutations during the last Trump administration for a number of people who were victimized by this trial penalty. And I've been arguing against this trial penalty since, believe it or not, 1966. I wrote my first Supreme Court cert petition against the trial penalty. So this is a passion of mine. And the Trump administration is following through and saying to prosecutors and judges, you cannot punish people for exercising their constitutional right to go to trial. And so I think that the pardon process under the Constitution serves a very important check and balance function against excesses by both courts and prosecutors. So I'm a fan of what the president has done in terms of who he's appointed to look at pardons and the way he's administered pardons. Look, every American has the right to disagree with a particular pardon decision. That's what America is all about, disagreement. But the process itself is a very good one. And of course, we know that President Biden used the pardon process to pardon his own son and to pardon relatives and friends and contributors. And so you should not fail the shoe on the other foot test. If you haven't criticized that, then don't criticize the current president.
So in terms of the Chrisleys, did you notice anything there outside of this that you think was, that they have alleged that they were treated unfairly, that there was misconduct, that there was evidence tampering, and their daughter Savannah has been campaigning for their release from the very beginning and working really hard to bring this to the forefront, and she, finally got it, of course, in front of the president. But what did you notice about that case, and do they have a point to be made about how they were treated?
They do, and they were treated unfairly, and it did fit within the criteria, the general criteria that the president and his surrogates have been applying. So look, I have been involved in numerous cases with evidence tampering. I have one right now where the FBI or somebody within the government or some expert tampered with the metadata and changed the dates on a photograph to create a crime out of something that wasn't a crime. And we're asking the government to look into that. And, I've been involved in cases for years and years and years in which I've successfully alleged evidence tampering, sometimes for guilty people. I've been involved in cases where the government has tried to frame guilty people. That may sound inconsistent, but you can be guilty and the government will still tamper with the evidence, enhance the evidence. And when that happens, juries often acquit. And judges often look askance at that. And so this is a complicated process, but it's a tripartite process because we have the legislature enacting the statute of what's the crime. the executive prosecuting the crime, the judiciary imposing the sentence, and now we have the executive applying a pardon commutation, executive clemency, as a check on the excesses. And so I think the process is working fairly effectively, thanks to President Trump creating this process both within the White House and within the Justice Department.
Last quick question I have for you, because, it was the big hot case of the summer so far. There's a lot going on, but I got to get your take just briefly on the Karen Read trial. I don't know how closely you followed it, but it was a big deal. Was she guilty? I mean, obviously, they found her not guilty, but do you think she was guilty?
I have no idea whether she was guilty. As a matter of fact, I have a strong idea that she was not proved guilty beyond a reasonable doubt by admissible evidence. So I think the jury came to the right conclusion. We say better 10 guilty go free than even one innocent person be wrongly confined. And under that standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, the jury reached the right verdict.
How much, she has a huge fan club, obviously. This was trial number 2, and there were people out there wearing pink supporting Karen Read. What kind of impact does that kind of community support and the fame that these trials attract, what kind of influence does that have on a jury? And do you think it's a problem?
It is a problem. It was a problem in the Chauvin case, obviously, when there were Congress, a member of Congress, Waters, was basically threatening violence if there was anything more than less than a conviction for murder of the policeman who was charged with killing George Floyd. So, we've seen crowds have both negative and positive influences, mostly negative. I think justice ought to be insulated from mobs and popular control. That's why courts have the authority to sequester juries, and they ought to use that authority more frequently, particularly when you have mobs outside the courthouse demanding a particular result. The result should be determined by 12 jurors selected fairly, overseen by a judge, not by who gets the biggest crowds and who has the best placards and posters. So I do think that we have a problem.
We know there'd be absolute mayhem if something did come down to change the Chauvin case, the George Floyd case that people are obviously very familiar with. It kicked off the summer riot season. But just in your expert opinion, do you think that President Trump would be right to take a look at that and maybe consider some type of a pardon in the case of Derek Chauvin?
The problem, of course, is it's a state case largely. There are federal elements to it, too. There are a number of cases that the president ought to look at, and I'm sure his people are looking at them, but a lot of them are state cases. For example, now in Arizona, there's a state case that I'm consulting on involving whether or not false electors violated Arizona law. But the president can't pardon state cases. He can only pardon in federal cases. And so it's up to governors or other boards to make decisions about state cases. And they should be looking at these cases in a very hard way. I do not believe Chauvin was guilty of murder. You can have an argument about manslaughter. You can have an argument about negligent homicide, but he was not guilty of murder. He did not intend to kill this person, nor did he meet the other qualifications for murder. I think this was a case where the crowd demanded a conviction. There was fear that if there wasn't a conviction, there'd be violence. That's not the way our criminal justice system should operate.
Well, unfortunately, thanks to the woke crowd, that seems to be the new trend. We're hoping we can reverse it. Thank you so much, Professor, for all of your insight, all of your expert knowledge. There's nobody better. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Hey, there's nobody better than you in asking the hard questions. So you're an excellent, excellent interviewer, and it was a pleasure and a privilege to be interviewed by you. Thank you. I'm
humbled by that. Thank you so much, Professor, and I hope to have you back. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Folks, we talked about it, but New York City appears to be signing its own symbolic death certificate if it elects this dude, Mamdani. And if they do, they deserve everything they get because of it. Oh, it's time for final thoughts. So I think it's obvious these liberal hellhole cities just cannot take a hint. I tell you what. New polling shows, and it's even worse today, that far-left radical Queens Assemblyman and New York City mayoral candidate Zohan Mamdani is overtaking nursing home Grim Reaper Andrew Cuomo ahead of the primary, which is today. And I know it's a real Sophie's choice, but come on. This guy.
How many more New Yorkers without toys? Do you believe in the First Amendment? Do you believe in the First Amendment, Tom Homan? How many more New Yorkers without targets?
Classy. He's unhinged. He wants to abolish ICE, establish city government-owned supermarkets, allocate $65 million to trans treatment, including for minors. And let's not forget, he's a proud Islamic socialist, whatever the hell that even is. I don't even want to know. I get that Cuomo is a buffoon, was an atrocious governor, and no doubt sent elderly New Yorkers to their graves with his COVID policies. But he's no moderate leader. But the fact that this dude is now pulling ahead, yes, pulling ahead in the polls, tells me New York and New Yorkers have learned absolutely nothing at all. If you don't feel safe in your city, you're sick of footing the bill for illegals, you're sick of being overtaxed and overregulated, sick of dealing with lawless hellscapes that your city has become, why would you ever even take someone like that even remotely seriously? I'll tell you what, I'll share the same sentiments I shared on LA. New York City is likely unsavable, and perhaps that's by design. I don't know. I don't know why you'd want to destroy one of the nation's most important and most vibrant and iconic cities, but if you choose to do that, you're on your own. As Governor Ron DeSantis correctly noted, Florida is about to be essentially colonized by New York. And if you're good people who don't want to New Yorkify it, I'm sure you're welcome. But if you flee your crap hole to turn our great red states into crap holes, don't think you're going to be met with sunshine and a red carpet. Oh, no. I don't want to see these blue cities fail. I really don't. But you're making it really hard for the rest of us not to think you're doing this on purpose. Are you masochists or just not that smart? I don't know. But those are my final thoughts. Please, New York City, don't make fools of yourselves. But please be sure to tune in live tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. Catch full episodes of the show on Outkick and Fox Nation. Also, please do like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless. Take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.